about the money that we accrue or earthly treasures that we collect or anything else that is temporary. The most important thing that we can leave, the most positive impact that we can have is those around us that we influence and teach to follow God. I'm not saying that it is of no value to leave a strong material inheritance to your children, but it is far more important for you to teach your children to follow God, to live for God. I'm not saying that it's bad to build a business, but it is far or anything else. There's clearly value in all of those things. I'm saying that everything must be put in its proper place and in its proper order. Our first priority should be to leave a strong legacy of following God. When we do that, we can leave a strong generation behind us that will point to God and not to men. Gideon did a lot of things right in his life, but the legacy he left was not as strong as the rest of his life. We can live well for God for a long time, but if we fail to build up that next generation, it can have horrible and long-reaching consequences. And we're going to talk about one of the forms that those consequences can take today. After Gideon, another leader rose in Israel. But this one did not arise out of need like the judges had that we have been talking about. This one arose out of ambition and a self-serving nature. Where Gideon was a humble leader that was called by God, this man that we are going to be talking about is arrogant. And it is kind of ironic that this was one of Gideon's sons. He was named in the section that we read last week. His name is Abimelech. And his story is one that will show us the dangers of living for ourselves. Abimelech's ambition is on display right away. In verses 1 and 2, Abimelech plants the seeds of his plan to rise to power. In doing this, he is dishonoring the desires of his father, but apparently the allure of power is greater than the desire to do what is right. This is because at his core, Abimelech is a selfish man who lives only for himself. In Judges 9, beginning in verse 1, it says, Then Abimelech, the son of Jerubbaal, went to Shechem, to his mother's brothers, and spoke with them and with all the family of the house of his mother's father, saying, Please speak in the hearing of all the men of Shechem. Which is better for you, that all 70 of the sons of Jerubbaal reign over you, or that one reign over you? Remember that I am your own flesh and bone. Now, even though Gideon had made it clear that he didn't want to rule over the people of Israel and that his children would not rule over the people of Israel, Abimelech immediately assumes that the children of Gideon are destined to rule. His own arrogance takes over immediately, and he starts to plant the seeds of saying, hey, what's better? Jerubbaal has tons of sons. He has 70 sons. Is it better that 70 men rule over you or just one? And remember that I'm one of you. He begins to see his brothers not as family, but as potential rivals because of his arrogance. When your life is all about you, and all you are concerned with is your own happiness, your own ambition, your own success, you begin to invent adversaries in your life. That's what Abimelech is doing here. He is inventing adversaries. Nowhere are we told that any of his 70 brothers had any ambition to rule at all. Yet in his self-centered attitude, he assumed that all of his brothers must be thinking the exact same way that he is. Now, if given the opportunity, would any of his brothers have challenged his ambition to rule? Possibly, but we don't know that for sure. But self-centered people always assume that everyone is just as self-centered as they are. This means that if you live your life just for yourself, you will begin to see enemies everywhere, because nobody will ever be as dedicated to your own success as you are. This attitude and paranoia that comes from self-centeredness will lead you to do all kinds of terrible things, to see your ambitions come true. Abimelech is no different. In verses 3 through 6, the full depravity of his plan comes into focus. He is not only trying to poison the minds of the people of Shechem against his brothers, but he also means to remove any potential threats for good. In doing so, he commits an act of great evil brought on by his lust for power. In Judges chapter 9, beginning in verse 3, it says, "And his mother's brothers spoke all these words concerning him in the hearing of all the men of Shechem. And their heart was inclined to follow Abimelech. For they said, 'He is our brother.' So they gave him 70 shekels of silver from the temple of Baal-bereth, with which Abimelech hired worthless and reckless men. And they followed him. Then he went to his father's house in Ophrah and killed his brothers, the 70 sons of Jerubbaal, on one stone. But Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal, was left, because he hid himself. And all the men of Shechem gathered together, all of Beth Millo, and they went and made Abimelech king beside the terebinth tree at the pillar that was in Shechem. So great was Abimelech's thirst for power that he was willing to and attempted to kill all 70 of his brothers. And he was almost successful. Only one survived. Abimelech used people to get what he wanted. And he harmed people to get what he wanted. When we make our lives all about ourselves, the people in our lives begin to fall into one of two categories: those who are useful to us and those who are threats to us. We see examples of both of these with Abimelech. He manipulates the people of Shechem to get them to provide him with the resources he needs to accomplish his goals. He preyed on their fear of outsiders, painting his brothers out to be a problem that needed to be dealt with. He also convinced them that they needed a king in the first place. They did not have a king before, so why did they need one now? Because Abimelech convinced them that they did. He used an all too common tactic, the us versus them mentality. All the while, he was just using them to get what he wanted. Abimelech told all the people of Shechem what they wanted to hear to get them on his side, and then used them to accomplish his own ends. They were nothing but tools for him to use. Not only them, but his mother's family falls into this category as well. They were useful to him to spread his propaganda to the people of Shechem. Are the people in your life that you are close to only there because of what they can do for you? Because if they have use to you, is that the only reason you keep people around? If so, that can be a sign that you are making your life and that relationship all about you. It could be showing that a self-centered nature is beginning to take root in your heart. If you begin to look at your relationships and say, well, what can I get from this person? What can they do for me? The other category of people that Abimelech saw was enemies. Whether they were actual enemies or potential enemies or even imagined enemies didn't really matter. His brothers had done nothing that we know of to harm him in any way. So this was a case of him seeing enemies where there weren't any. His self-centered, all-about-me mentality only viewed them through the lens of what they could do for him. And they could not help him in any way to accomplish his ambitions. But they might challenge his authority someday. So they had to be disposed of. This is an extreme example, but we can still have this same kind of mentality today. Now, most often it's not going to manifest itself in killing sprees, but if you find yourself cutting people out of your life the very first time they make the smallest slight against you, whether it's real or imagined, that could be a sign that you are being a little self-centered in that relationship as well. Self-centered people will view people almost like pieces on a chessboard. They're either your own piece and can be used, thrown around, or even sacrificed in the name of your success. Or there are enemy pieces, and they must be destroyed, preferably before they can destroy you. But people aren't chess pieces. People are created in the image of God. We have value because of that image. God came to earth and died for us, not so that we can use each other for our own selfish gain and destroy anyone that gets in our way. That is not how we should act. We are called to love people, build relationships, not step on whoever we can or must to get to the top. The sad thing is that many times those self-centered people get exactly what they want. Abimelech did. He killed all but one of his brothers, just as he planned. And he was crowned king in Shechem, just like he wanted. I'm not going to stand here and try to tell you that self-centered people will always fail in their ambitions, because that's simply not true. We all know enough of the world to know that. Many times they simply must destroy their relationships to get there. Why do you think so many of these billionaire, world-beating businessmen seem to conquer all, yet so many of them end up divorced and with no real relationship with their children? Two reasons I can see. First and most important, they don't have God as their guiding light in life. And their own ambition has caused them to rip apart the people in their lives to get what they want. And you want to know what the worst part is? The saddest part is, this doesn't even satisfy them. They always want more. Whatever wealth or power they attain never seems to be enough. John D. Rockefeller was asked by a reporter in the early 1900s, how much money is enough money? To which he replied, just a little bit more. He was the richest man on earth at the time, and that could not satisfy him. He had achieved all of his goals, yet he still needed more. He still wanted more. People who rise to the top of political power through selfish and destructive means will then become terrified of losing that power and will do anything to hold on to it. Joseph Stalin was famously paranoid. He saw rivals everywhere. He would assume that there were a certain number of enemies in a given city and tell his secret to police to go and round up and execute that many people so that no one would overthrow him. The fact of the matter is that most of the time they were imagined enemies, just as Abimelech saw his brothers as. Your self-centered attitude may get you what you want, but it's never going to give you the satisfaction that you are seeking, because money is never enough. Power is never enough. But God is enough. Abimelech got what he wanted, but he had to rip apart something that actually could have made him happy to do it. His surviving brother Jotham then tells a parable in verses 7 through 21. In this parable, he warns that Abimelech's own ambition could be his undoing and could bring ruin to himself and to Shechem. In Judges chapter 9, beginning in verse 7, it says, Now when they told Jotham, he went and stood on top of Mount Gerizim, and lifted his voice and cried out. And he said to them, Listen to me, you men of Shechem, that God may listen to you. The trees once went forth to anoint a king over them. And they said to the olive tree, Reign over us. But the olive tree said to them, Should I cease giving my oil, with which they honor God and men, and go to sway over trees? Then the trees said to the fig tree, You come and reign over us. But the fig tree said to them, Should I cease my sweetness and my good fruit, and go to sway over trees? Then the trees said to the vine, You come and reign over us. But the vine said to them, Should I cease my new wine, which cheers both God and men, and go to sway over trees? Then all the trees said to the bramble, You come and reign over us. And the bramble said to the trees, If in truth you anoint me as king over you, then come and take shelter in my shade. But if not, let fire come out of the bramble and devour the cedars of Lebanon. Now therefore, if you have acted in truth and sincerity in making Abimelech king, and if you have dealt well with Jerubbaal and his house, and have done to him as he deserves, for my father fought for you, risked his life, and delivered you out of the hand of Midian. But you have risen up against my father's house this day, and killed his 70 sons on one stone, and made Abimelech, the son of his female servant, king over the men of Shechem, because he is your brother. If then you have acted in truth and sincerity with Jerubbaal and with his house this day, then rejoice in Abimelech, and let him also rejoice in you. But if not, let fire come from Abimelech and devour the men of Shechem and Beth Millo. And let fire come from the men of Shechem and from Beth Millo and devour Abimelech. And Jotham ran away and fled. He went to Beer and dwelt there for fear of Abimelech his brother. So Jotham tells a story about the trees, seeking to make one of their own king over them. He begins with one of the most important trees in their culture, the olive tree. It was prized for the oil that it gave. So in the context of this story, it would make sense that this would be the first tree that would be approached. But the olive tree rejects the offer because it does not want to give up its God-given role and purpose of giving oil. The fig tree and the vine make similar refusals because they also do not want to give up their God-given roles by which they honor God and men. This refusal by these great trees mirrors Gideon's own refusal to take on a role that was not his to take on. Gideon was truly a great man, but it was not for him to be king, just as the olive tree, fig tree, and vine were called to be something other than kings in this parable. Then the bramble was asked to be king and accepted. Now, the bramble is a broad category of prickly bushes by which we can get things like raspberries and blackberries. But this absolutely would have been seen as a lesser plant than the trees that were mentioned before. This is a clear mocking of Abimelech, calling him a lesser leader or unfit. The funny thing is that even the bramble was not completely useless. As I just said, it offered berries. It would not have been considered on the same level as the olive tree, fig tree, or vine, but still had a role that God had given to it. But notice the difference between how the bramble reacted and how the three previous did. When presented with the opportunity to elevate itself in direct opposition to God's plan for it, instead of refusing as the others did, it jumped at the opportunity. The meaning here is clear. Abimelech should have refused to be king instead of seeking it out. Jotham even goes a step further and says, because of the horrible deeds that Abimelech committed to get his power, that he would become a consuming fire to the men of Shechem, and vice versa. He even says that if they had acted in good faith and simply made Abimelech king without committing the atrocity of killing his brothers, that they may have done well with this decision. This shows us that not everyone that rises to power does so in an evil way. He's saying you could have had Abimelech rise to be king in a way that honored my house, but you didn't do that. You decided to step on people to get there. Not everybody who rises to authority did evil to get there, but too often we see that as a shortcut to get what we want. This shows that Abimelech's fear of his brothers being a threat to him was actually unfounded, because Jotham had no interest in challenging his brother's authority. But Abimelech let his self-centered nature and his lust for power lead him to commit a great evil to get what he wanted. And now Jotham is predicting that that same self-centered nature and lust for power will become a great trouble to himself and to the people around him. But self-centered people can never accept the role that God has for them in their life, any more than the bramble in Jotham's parable could accept its own role. Self-centered people always crave more than what they should have. They always crave more than what God has for them, and they are willing to do whatever it takes to get there. The sad thing is that by accepting the role that we have been given by God and living for Him the best way that we know how, we can actually find fulfillment that these self-centered people are chasing. In his story, the olive tree was fulfilled in its role of providing oil because it knew that it brought glory to God and men by doing so. The fig tree was fulfilled because it brought sweetness and good fruit for the people to eat. The vine was fulfilled because it brought celebration and happiness to God and men. Now, you could easily argue that any of these roles is lesser than ruling, but they knew that it was not for them to rule because they knew that they would not honor God by denying the roles that they had been given. When we deny our self-centered nature and live a life of humble dedication to God, we too can bring honor, sweetness, and happiness to our lives and to the people around us. Or we can be that self-centered bramble who seeks more and more and more. And we run the risk of becoming a consuming fire to all those who are around us. So what are you? Are you someone who delights in the life that God has given you and seeks to live to honor Him? Or are you that bramble that seeks nothing but your own glory? Have you at times been so consumed with gaining more, whether that be money, reputation, influence, power, that you have been willing to use and mistreat people to get it? This is not who we are called to be. And let me tell you that there will be no satisfaction found in it. I know the example given of Abimelech is an extreme one. I mean, I'm sure that no one in this room has ever gone on a killing spree so they can rule over a city. But regardless of the form it takes, the heart is the same. If you allow your selfish desires to reign in your life, you are going to do horrible things in the name of those desires. It's only a matter of time. Not only will you do horrible things, but in the end, you will not even be happy in that. You will end up setting fire to your own life in the process. Seek fulfillment in the things that actually fulfill. Don't step on people to get to where you think you want to be. Love them, build them up, have relationship with people. Foster strong relationships with your family wherever possible. But most importantly of all, seek God with everything you have. This is what will give you fulfillment. This is what will give you satisfaction, not the accumulation of wealth, power, authority, anything else. One of the things that we've been doing in my house lately is we've been doing a verse of the week with the kids to try to get as much of the word into them as possible. The verse from last week was Matthew 22:37, and I think it's one of the simplest yet most important things that we can learn. Jesus is saying this in response to someone asking him what the greatest commandment is. In Matthew 22:37, it says, Jesus said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind." We do this not just because we are commanded to, but because it is the one thing that will give you fulfillment and satisfaction in your life, more than money, more than power, or anything else ever could. We're going to see next week what the alternative is. It leads to ruin. I don't want that for you. I don't want us to walk down this path of self-centered indulgence that leads to destruction. I want the fulfillment and the joy that comes from living in God's perfect will for your life. You will have to deny your selfish desires, but the result will leave you so much more satisfied than what following those desires ever could. Let me tell you, I know it's easy to seek after those selfish desires. I know that it's easy to just try to accumulate more and more, and you start viewing people as objects that can be used to accomplish your ends. It's easy to walk that path, but I promise you there's no satisfaction in it. We live for God. We live for the people around us, and I promise you, your life will be so much richer and fuller for it. Or you can try to be that self-centered person, and you could try to see if you'll be the first one ever to actually accumulate enough to make you happy. But I promise you it's not going to happen. I promise you that it only leads to destruction. Seek God. Seek the fulfillment that He offers in your life. It might not be everything that you ever dreamed that you would have, but it is exactly who He has called you to be, to bring honor, glory, and happiness into the lives of yourself and the lives of others. Let's pray. Father God, I love you. It is easy for us to allow our ambition, our drive, our pride to get the better of us and seek things that we shouldn't have and use people to accomplish goals that we shouldn't. Lord, may we seek your will for our lives, not our own desires. Lord, when our selfish desires take hold, we begin to mistreat people just so that we can accomplish what we think we want. So, Lord, I ask right now that we would instead seek to follow you, seek to follow your plan. And Lord, humble ourselves to accept that maybe we aren't called to be what we would like to be, but we are called to be what you have designed us to be. And we will find greater satisfaction in following the path that you have laid out in our lives than we ever could by following our own selfish desires. Lord, our self-centered nature is a consuming fire that will destroy our lives and destroy those around us if we allow it to go unchecked. So, Lord, I pray we would seek after you and we would humble ourselves and be who you have called us to be and find satisfaction in that. I ask this in your mighty and precious name. Amen. I love you guys. It is good to walk the path that God has set out in front of you. I promise you it will bring you satisfaction in a way nothing else ever will. I love you. Go have a